You might not know this about me, but I really like Saw. If that wasn't immediately obvious by how much I've been posting about it for the past 4 months. I love everything about it. Its intriguing characters, the creative plots, the clever plot twists. However, there are 3 out of the current 10 Saw films that are universally considered by the fandom to be pretty bad. Saw 3D is bad because it has a pretty unlikable main character and a really stupid cop plotline. Spiral is considered bad because it comes off more like a weird parody of Saw rather than an actual Saw film. And Jigsaw is considered bad because it's boring and it's not very interesting and its characters and storyline are very dull. And actually, why does no one ever go into any more detail on why this movie is bad other than it's boring? I haven't seen any real in-depth discussion on why this movie is so terrible before. And I can see why. In order to discuss Jigsaw, you have to actually watch it. Well, I have decided to take one for the team and fully break down just how much of an abomination Jigsaw is. Our opening involves this guy named Edgar getting chased down by police, which ends up leading them to the roof of this building, where he's caught by 2 cops, Detective Halloran and Keith. He gives them some ominous warning about how he's playing a game and that he doesn't want to die, but of course, since these are cops and Saw cops like that, they don't listen to him, and he ends up getting his hand blown off and shot so much they have to put him in a coma. Now, in this opening alone, we already see some problems. For one, this fucking dialogue.
Hey, Edgar, I don't want to shoot you, but I will.
None of the conversations in this movie feel like real conversations between real people. They just sound like the cliff notes of a conversation rather than an actual conversation. Basically, every single bit of dialogue between these characters is solely for the purpose of getting from one point to the plot to the other. There's no real consideration of how we get there or even how these characters would just naturally speak to each other. Anyway, so after that opening, we then immediately cut to some people stuck in a room together. This is where we meet our unfortunate cast of characters who we're going to be following for most of the movie. And who's kind of the self-appointed leader of the group and can either be extremely smart or really stupid depending on what's most convenient for the script. Ryan, who's only capable of speaking in fucks or bad jokes. Mitch, who has the greatest teeth I've ever seen. Like, my god, there's not a single bit of plaque on those things. Carly, whose actress is way too good for this movie. And some dude I don't care about. Unfortunately for them, instead of going to a Buckethead concert, they are all immediately dragged by the neck towards some buzzards. Then we get what is probably the worst John Kramer monologue of all time.
You deny culpability, no doubt, for the circumstances in which you find yourselves. Salvation can be yours if you cleanse yourselves of the habitual lies which have brought you here.
Anyways, Anne figures out they need to cut themselves in order to escape the trap, and thus everyone is able to escape. Well, except for this guy, but I'm sure he wasn't important. Let's just forget about him. Anyways, we then cut back to the hospital where Edgar's been put in a coma due to his previously injuries. However, Halloran and Keith still want to question him. We also see in this scene another example of how unnatural the dialogue is.
Hungry?
Oh yes, after immediately being told you have to wait to get important information for a case, you immediately ask your fellow cop for lunch, because that's exactly what real humans would do in this situation, totally. Anyways, we cut back to our dysfunctional squad where they have their mandatory Saw trap victim freakout.
He said it was a game. Well, then I hope for all of our sakes that it is a game.
Well, yeah, why is that, sweetheart?
This game's gonna be won.
Wow, that's actually a really good line. Wow, I'm impressed, movie. Anyways, after we see another Buckethead getting hung, we're finally introduced to probably the worst character in this entire movie. Logan Nelson. Basically, his whole deal is that he's a doctor who has a daughter, but is unable to spend as much time with her as he'd like due to his job. A doctor has a hard time balancing his work and home life and ends up getting involved in the investigation of John Kramer. This sounds really familiar, but I can't quite put my finger on it. Anyways, so Halloran and Keith end up interrupting him and his daughter's little baseball game and take him to a morgue, where we end up meeting the one good character in this entire train wreck, Eleanor. Basically, her whole thing is that she's Logan's assistant, who they kind of also imply he might have some sort of romantic relationship with, but like everything in this movie, it's not very well developed. Anyways, they're brought to do an autopsy on this guy whose head kind of looks like a melted ice cream cone. Hey, did I mention how much I hate the dialogue in this movie yet?
Been studying up on John Kramer. Copycat?
Hope not. Kramer's been dead for 10 years.
Why would them being a copycat mean that John Kramer isn't dead anymore? That makes no fucking sense. The point of a copycat killer is that it's someone who's not the killer that copies them. That's why they're called a fucking copycat killer. Anyway, so they realize that this guy has a jigsaw piece scar and decide to cut into it. And in true John Kramer fashion, there's an SD card in his wound. Side note, this is the most butchered version of the Saw theme I've ever heard. They put the SD card into the computer, then we get a cryptic-ass message implying maybe John is still alive after all somehow. But we're gonna have to worry about that later, because now we're back to our unfortunate group of trappies. Billy rolls his way into frame with a little note on his chest that says confess. And right here we see another problem with this movie. It's extremely forced and bad attempts at humor.
What the fuck?
No, it's not creepy at all.
Okay, I don't know if this isn't immediately obvious, but Saw is really funny.
They kidnap you and drug you before you know it, you're lying in a bathtub and your kidneys are on eBay. Me in there? Huh? Most fun I've had without lubricant.
And those are just a few examples. Pretty much every Saw movie, even the worst one in the main timeline, has a good amount of humor sprinkled throughout. And that helps serve an important purpose. Not only does it give the audience a quick break from all the torture and violence, but also helped develop the characters and made us a lot more attached to them. We probably wouldn't have cared nearly as much when Adam died in Saw 3 had we not had those lighthearted moments with him and Larry in the first movie. It made his death feel all the more devastating to us. But in this movie, all the jokes basically just boiled down to, well, that just happened. It feels less like a natural inclusion and more really forced, as if the script had a little section that said, joke goes here. Anyway, so Billy starts reciting the evil stick audio at them, which cues their next trap to start. While this is happening, this spurs the characters to give us their edgy anime backstories. Mitch's whole deal is that he sold a kid a bike, but then the brakes on the bike broke immediately, which caused the kid to end up getting run over. Well, Anne's whole deal is that her husband rolled over while he was sleeping and suffocated the baby. Wow, both of these sound like really believable stories that I'm sure won't be revealed to actually have been lies later. Anyway, so Mitch decides he doesn't want there to be another flashback episode, so he snatches the tape from Billy. The rules for this trap are basically the characters have to figure out which one of these needles is acid in or not, and if they don't find out in the right amount of time, well, they're gonna end up being hung. During this sequence, we get Carly's anime backstory. Basically, she was a purse snatcher, and one day she ended up stealing from a woman that had medication she needed in the purse, and that caused her to instantly die within like 3 minutes of not getting it. Anyway, so Ryan, being the unlikable asshole he is, threatens to shoot up Carly with all the needles if she doesn't immediately figure out which one's which. Surprisingly, even in a moment of stress, Carly ends up figuring out the puzzle pretty quickly. However, before she can inject herself, the chains are pulled out, and they're all about to be hung. However, frustratingly, even though Carly knows which one of these needles is the correct one, she still doesn't inject herself for some reason, and has a little hissy fit. However, as the characters are about to be hung to their death, Ryan ends up having a little freak out and stabs all the needles into Carly, which results in her getting her insides melted out, which kind of reminds me of Easton's death in Saw 6, which makes me think, God, I'd rather just be watching Saw 6 right now. So another trappy is down, now we only got 3 left. Anyway, so Anne understandably ends up crashing out at Ryan because he basically just killed an innocent person by being an idiot. But she ends up getting over that pretty quickly. Wow, we could have had a really interesting conflict, but that's also wasted. We then cut back to Lincoln Logs and gang in the autopsy room where they figure out that the Buckethead's name is Malcolm Neal, whose wife was murdered some time ago. But according to Halloran, apparently he was a gambler, so he kind of blames her murder on him, to which Lipo then proceeds to ask him if he's ever done anything to convict the murderer, to which Halloran doesn't answer. I wonder if this is gonna come up later. Anyway, so they figure out that the guy on the SD card was 100% John Kramer, to which Eleanor and Lipstick have a pretentious edge-off where they try to top each other on how lazy and try-hard their dialogue can be. We also learn here that there are former victims in whatever game is currently being held or has already been held. Anyway, so Hogan and Halloran end up finding another body, so they take it to the morgue. Here we find out this person's insides were melted with hydrofluoric acid. Wow, that's just like how Carly died. Could that mean that the people on the SD card are our trappies?
Jake fucking Saw.
This movie had 2 writers. We then cut back to our trappee gang. They end up finding another room, to which for some reason, only now Anne starts to freak out. Girl, why did the person getting her insides melted out right in front of you not make you freak out? Why are you doing this now? Anyway, so Ryan, after trying to go through the door that says no exit, has some epic bad luck and ends up getting his leg caught in some wires. While they figure out what to do, the characters end up discovering a big cyclone with a tape inside. Mitch reaches for it, but unfortunately it seems the cost of having perfect teeth makes you unable to jump. So he ends up giving Anne a piggyback ride, and they reach it, which cues the start of their next trap. The rules for this trap being Ryan either has to cut his leg off, or let them get buried alive. You know, come to think of it, what was John planning on doing if Ryan didn't go through the fake door? Anyways, this is easily the worst part of this movie. This scene drags for an agonizing amount of time. I don't think there's a single trap in this series that has gone on for as long as this one has. We spend so much time on these characters getting buried alive, begging Ryan to do something, and him just sitting there twiddling his thumbs, contemplating if he should cut his leg off or not, that this scene really need to be as long as it is. Anyways, while that's happening, we cut to Halloran sexually harassing Eleanor because I guess we needed another reason to not like him. We then see Leapfrog having a video call with his daughter, again showing he's mostly absent in her life. Wow, that sounds really familiar, but it's probably just a coincidence. I'm probably just making connections where there aren't there. Halloran then shows up and decides to laceration about his relationship with Eleanor.
Logan, you ever heard of a website called Jigsaw Rules?
Not even an hour into this fucking movie! Anyways, we learn here that Eleanor is basically a true crime girly, and thus maybe their suspected copycat. But they can't worry about that for long, because they're called back to the lab to reveal that none other than John Kramer's DNA was found on Buckethead. And then cut back to our trio of assholes, where things end up getting even more dire, because they're not only getting buried alive, they're also having sharp objects thrown at them. And Ryan is still taking an entire century to decide whether to cut his leg off or not. Finally, after nearly getting impaled, Ryan decides to pull the lever, cutting off his leg and freeing everyone else. We then cut to Lilypad meeting up with Eleanor at a bar. They're discussing how Halloran is suspicious of her, where Eleanor accuses him of having a crush on Halloran? Am I interpreting this line right?
You really love that guy, huh?
Liquid ends up informing Eleanor that Halloran is a pretty shitty cop that caused many criminals to not get prosecuted and continue harming people. Eleanor also tells him she has a studio, whatever the hell that means, and decides to take him to it. Anyways, at the studio, we see that Eleanor has a bunch of recreations of various saw traps. You got the angel trap, House Drop Bully, got the hole in his throaty, the bear trap, you get the gist. LaCroix is obviously weirded out by this, but Eleanor proceeds to start info dumping about John Kramer to him, telling him that she got the blueprints for this trap off some guy from the internet. But Licorice then tells her that John Kramer never built a trap like this, and none of the victims were found dead in a trap like this. Wow, it kinda seems like Lactose knows a weird amount about John Kramer. While they're having this argument, it turns out Keith has been stalking them this whole time, and sees Eleanor having all these trap recreations as absolute proof she's the copycat. We then cut back to our dysfunctional squad where Anna's patching up Ryan's wounds, which, like, girl, why are you helping him? He's not worth it. While she's doing that, Mitch discovers another trap, which then immediately sets off. Anyways, it's revealed that Mitchell wasn't telling the whole truth when he gave his anime back. Basically, he knew for a fact the bike he sold the kid was faulty. Also, the kid is apparently John's nephew, which is such a random character detail. It's never brought up again, and just seems like such a lazy way to connect Mitch to John. Anyway, so Anne ends up stopping the trap for a moment, but instead of pulling the brake like the trap said, or even just trying to pull Mitch up, Anne just kind of stares at him for a second, and then the trap starts up again, killing Mitch. So now our group is down to just 2. Anyway, since the public is speculating John Kramer might still be alive, they decide to dig up his grave to see if he's still there, and well, turns out they get a little bit of a problem, which then spurs them to raid Eleanor's studio for evidence, to which they end up finding out that Eleanor still reads newspapers. Oh, and they also find a dead body. After this discovery, Keith takes in legislation for interrogation, to which he tries to accuse Halloran of being the copycat. And Keith just immediately buys this for some reason, like, damn, you are not a loyal partner. Anyway, so Keith with Lemonade's help go looking for clues to see if Halloran's the killer, which they find out the killer uses the exact same gun he does. So now the cops are officially off his back. Longhorned Owl then returns to his home and calls Eleanor, asking her to come to his house immediately, only to find out that she was already there. She then tells him she has a good idea of where the game's being held, and that she doesn't want to call the cops since, well, they think Halloran's behind it. We then return to our unfortunate duo, where it looks like Anne finally found the exit, but unfortunately for her, she's immediately knocked out before she can get through it. She wakes up chained to a wall. We then see exactly who chained her to that wall. None other than John Kramer. Now, you're probably wondering, how the hell is John still alive? We literally saw him get autopsied in the 4th movie. Well, I'll explain that in a little bit, but for now, John decides to reveal Ryan's anime backstory. Apparently in high school, he ended up falling out of a car which caused his friends to die in a car accident while repeatedly lying to the authorities about why the car accident happened. John then decides to share his anime backstory too. Apparently his cancer was almost entirely preventable, but the person doing his x-rays ended up putting the wrong name on them, causing his cancer to be diagnosed when the tumor had already become inoperable. Man, this shot is framed really weird. I wonder why they're trying to hide this guy's face so bad. It's also revealed here that Anne was not telling the whole truth earlier. You see, it turns out that her husband didn't roll over and suffocate the baby. Apparently, it was just crying a lot, and for some fucking reason, Anne just decided to kill her baby because it was crying too much, and thus framed her husband for it, which caused him to A-pose to death. Now, this very scene shows the fundamental flaw of this movie. These trap victims suck. None of them are in any way likable, funny, or even interesting. How am I supposed to care or root for any of these guys? I hate Ryan because he took 25 years to save everyone in the cyclone. And I hate Anne because she killed her baby for literally no fucking reason. This final conflict is not in any way impactful because I'm not rooting for literally any of these guys. Now, for the record, I'm not saying a trap victim can't do bad things or be a bad person. I mean more, they have to have literally anything that makes them likable or interesting if you want people to care about them. Take William Mason from Saw 6, for example. Objectively speaking, he's a horrible person. However, for the entirety of his test, we really see how much he's come to regret his actions. So seeing him trying to save people in the traps ultimately makes you root for him. And his violent death at the hands of Roger Cathley becomes all the more tragic and impactful. Now, what is there for me to like about Anne? Yeah, she gets kind of mad at Ryan after Carly dies, but gets over it, like, immediately, and straight up just lets Mitch die because she was an idiot. And doesn't even really care after. There's basically no reason for me to be invested in her character. As Ryan asks John to let him go, but instead of doing that, John just decides to start info dumping about pigs instead, because he just has an autistic swag. And then gives them a gun with one bullet, and then fucks off, leading them to do whatever they need to do with it. He did the door slam. And he didn't even say game over. Can this movie get literally anything right? While that's going down, Lateral and Eleanor end up going to a barn that used to belong to Jill Tuck, the barn in which they think the current game has happened. While they're exploring, Lobotomy ends up getting suspicious that Eleanor is the copycat, despite the fact he literally tried to clear her name earlier, and he already thinks that Holloran's the copycat, so why the fuck is he doing this? This is the most lazy, forged red herring I've ever seen in a movie. And hey, I guess Holloran thinks this is an asshole too, because he immediately comes to interrupt it. Anyways, Holloran and him end up getting into a little squabble, and then Eleanor runs away. No, Eleanor, don't go! Come on! You're the one good part of this movie! Come back, Eleanor, please! We then return to our duo, where Anne decides to use the gun to kill Ryan. However, it turns out they had it all backwards, and Anne just ends up getting half her face blown off. Good fucking riddance. Anyways, Ryan finds the key in the bullet casing, but it's broken, so it's basically useless to him. We then cut back to Holloran, who ends up getting knocked out. He wakes up with Lapis Lazuli and realizes they're both in a little bit of a pickle. John comes through the intercom and tells them the only way they can get out of this is if they confess all their wrongdoings. All they gotta do is press the button to start the trap. However, since Holloran's a bit of a dick, he decides to press Lampshade's button for him, forcing him to confess first, where he confesses that he was the one that got John's x-rays wrong. Wow. A doctor that's personally connected to John Kramer. Again, that sounds really familiar, but I just can't quite put my finger on it. It seems confessing wasn't enough since Lepidolite still dies. Wow, and nothing of value was lost. But now it's Holloran's turn, and it seems his confession was actually enough for John, as the lasers are immediately put away. Or not, because it turns out Larimar wasn't actually dead after all. And now it's time for the twist of this movie. We all know every Saw movie has a twist, and in this case, it's that Lumbar was actually the Buckethead we saw get buzzard in the back earlier. After surviving it, John just cut his trap early and recruited him as an apprentice. Wow, a Jigsaw apprentice, who's a doctor, who has a personal connection to John Kramer, who has a daughter he neglects because he has trouble balancing his job and his home life. This sounds so familiar, but I can't quite put my finger on it. Oh, wait! This guy is just worse Lawrence Gordon. His entire motivation, his backstory, pretty much everything about him is almost identical to Lawrence. In fact, why isn't he Lawrence? Think about it. The storyline of Labor messing up John's x-rays, John having a personal vendetta against him for it. What are we doing here? This is Lawrence. This should have been his story. I mean, it would be a natural progression. Saw 3 was Amanda's movie. Saw 5 was Mark's movie. Saw 8 should have been Lawrence's movie. Not this weird bootleg version of him. Anyways, now on to the other twist of this movie. Turns out the game we've been following the entire time actually happened 10 years ago. And somehow, Leukemia managed to find criminals that Holloran didn't prosecute that were also nearly identical to the trapeze in the game that happened 10 years ago, and made the traps exactly the same as that game for that reason. Now, can you see why this is fucking stupid? The whole point of a trap is that it's meant to be personalized to each victim. If they're just exact copies of previous traps, that defeats the entire purpose. How did this movie not understand this fundamental part of Saw? Anyway, so Lava also reveals here that Edgar Munson, the guy in the coma earlier, killed his wife, and that's one of the main reasons he hates Holloran so much. Well, he does love his wife. I guess that's one thing he doesn't have in common with Larry. And no. Fuck you, movie. No. Fuck you, movie. You are not implying this motherfucker made the bear trap. Fuck you.
This won't bring your family back. John Kramer gave you...
Could they seriously not do another take of the scene? Yeah, wow, Halloran, you're making a really good case for why laboratory shouldn't kill you. Anyways, Halloran is then killed by bad effects, and thus the movie finally ends. You know, for as terrible as this movie was, I think there's certainly something we can learn from it. With this new remake sequel thing that's coming out for Saw, I think it's important the filmmakers learn from the mistakes of this movie. This movie tried its best to be an introduction to newcomers of the series, a remake-ish, but it failed to properly introduce to people what made Saw interesting. It failed to capture the premise, it failed to make interesting characters, and that's probably why it bombed so hard at the box office. Either way, I'm still cautiously optimistic for this new Saw film. Maybe it'll be good, maybe it'll be bad, and if it's bad, well, you'll know where to find me.